explodes on a bridge connecting Russia-annexed Crimea with Russia. Say the explosion on Europe's longest bridge caused 7 railway cars carrying fuel to catch fire.
At 3:42 a.m., freezing fog smothered the outskirts of Kupyansk. Silence hung over a critical rail bridge and the sprawling freight yard where Russia moved millions in weapons, shells, and fuel to the front. Moscow believed this supply chain was untouchable. In the distance, floodlights hummed and train brakes screeched. Then, through the gloom came a whisper. The first Ukrainian drones, silent and lethal, slicing through the fog. In an instant, the calm shattered. But how do you make an entire army supply line simply vanish? Kupyansk, the unconquered linchpin. Think of a giant war machine. It needs constant fuel. It eats thousands of artillery shells every single day. To keep it moving, you need roads. You need railways. You need a way to get all that material from the back areas right to the very edge of the fight. Now, look at a map of eastern Ukraine. Right in the middle of this grinding, brutal front line, you will find a city called Kupyansk. For years, this place has been a storm center. And for a very simple reason. Location, location, location. Kupyansk is a crossroads. It sits on the Oskil River. Important roads meet here. But the real prize, the thing that makes generals and presidents lose sleep, is the railway. Before the war, Kupyansk was the second biggest railway hub in the entire Kharkiv region. That's not just a fancy title. It means this one spot was connected to everything. Thick steel rails ran out from Kupyansk like spokes on a bicycle wheel, reaching out to every other key town in the Donbass. One line goes southeast towards the battered cities of Siversk and Lysychansk. Another pushes east towards Kreminna. These are not just names on a map. These are the places where thousands of soldiers are fighting right now, where the ground is churned to mud and ash from constant shelling. For the Russian army, this is a huge problem. Their style of war is like a hungry giant. It needs a monstrous amount of food. But that food, the shells, the fuel, the spare parts, isn't made right on the front line. It has to be brought in from far away, from inside Russia itself. The longer that journey is, the harder it gets. Trucks break down, convoys get stuck, and every single mile of road is a chance for a Ukrainian drone or a saboteur to strike. So imagine you are a Russian commander. Your troops are stuck in a bloody fight near, say, Siversk. Every shell they fire has to travel a long, dangerous road from the Russian border. It takes time. It costs fuel. It risks being destroyed. Now, imagine you capture Kupyansk. Suddenly, you have a magic shortcut. You can bring those trainloads of ammunition all the way from Russia, right into the Kupyansk rail yard. From there, it's a much shorter, quicker trip to the front. You can supply your hungry giant faster and more reliably than ever before. Capturing Kupyansk isn't just about taking a city. It's about plugging your entire war effort in eastern Ukraine into a supercharger. But there's another reason, a deeper reason, why Russia wanted this city so badly. But Russia wanted Kupyansk for another reason: revenge. Go back to September 2022. The Russian army was in control of Kupyansk. Then Ukraine launched a shocking, lightning-fast counterattack from the north. Russian forces were completely surprised. Their lines collapsed. In a matter of days, they were scrambling out of Kupyansk in a chaotic, messy retreat. It was one of the most embarrassing defeats for Russia in the entire war. For the Kremlin, that loss stung. It became a symbol of Ukrainian skill and Russian failure. So recapturing Kupyansk became more than a military goal. It became an obsession, a way to rewrite history, a way to say, see, that was just a temporary setback. We are winning. We are strong. By the end of 2025, after many months of brutal fighting and massive losses in other places, the Russian leadership needed a victory story. They needed to show their own people and the world that they were moving forward, that all the pain and cost was worth it. Kupyansk was the perfect prize. Taking it would prove their offensive was working. It would give them that supercharger for their supplies, and it would finally bury the ghost of their 2022 retreat. So they set their sights on it. They poured resources towards it. And in late November 2025, they began to spread the word. Kupyansk was once again theirs. The state media celebrated. It was presented as a done deal, a major turning point. But controlling a city on a propaganda map is one thing. Actually holding it, supplying it, and defending it is something completely different. Russia was about to learn that in the most brutal way possible. They had reached for the prize, but in doing so, they stretched their hand out into a trap, and Ukraine was ready to spring it. Russia's premature victory parade. So how did Russia claim to capture a city that Ukraine was still fiercely defending? They didn't roll in with a giant roaring tank attack. They did it with silence, shadows, and one very unusual secret passage. Forget open fields. Think underground. Their secret weapon wasn't a new missile. It was an old abandoned gas pipeline. A huge, dark tunnel left over from Soviet times, big enough for people to move through. For weeks, special Russian assault groups didn't march on Kupyansk. They crept. Deep below the frozen ground, soldiers from units like the 27th Motorized Rifle Brigade moved in complete darkness. They used quiet electric scooters and small carts, rolling for kilometers through a cold metal tube. This pipeline was their ghost road. It let them bypass the Ukrainian watchful eyes on the surface completely. They emerged like moles near a village called Radkivka, right on the edge of the target area. From there, they slipped into the northern forests and the broken suburbs of Kupyansk itself. It was a clever, sneaky move. Above ground, other Russian units were also pushing in a more normal way. They fought across the Oskil River and captured small villages to the north, like Kindrashivka. This created pressure from two directions, but the real game-changer, the thing that let them get men inside the city itself, was that dark, underground path. Once these small groups were inside the northern part of the city, they did something almost as important as the fighting. They took out their cameras. They filmed everything. Grainy, shaky clips from helmet cameras showed soldiers moving past shattered walls, weapons ready. Then, they staged more professional-looking videos, clips of Russian flags being raised on damaged apartment blocks. Soldiers giving thumbs up to the camera. The pictures were powerful and simple. They sent one clear message: our brave soldiers are here. We have liberated the city. This was the perfect fuel for propaganda. The story was easy to sell and it spread like wildfire. On Telegram channels on state TV, the word went out. In late October, reports came out that Russia's top general told Putin the city was taken. By late November, the story was set in stone for the world to see. Many international news agencies reported it. People believed it. The narrative was locked in. Kupyansk, the crucial rail hub, had fallen. It was a huge political and symbolic win, or so it seemed. But here was the gigantic, fatal flaw in the plan. What the exciting victory videos didn't show was the terrifying real situation on the ground. The Russian soldiers in northern Kupyansk were not a full, powerful army. They were not a consolidated force you could see massing in a field. They were small, advanced groups. Spear tips, not a clenched fist, maybe a few hundred men at most, and they were in a terribly dangerous position. Their entire supply line was a single fragile thread, not a thick rope. Everything they needed to survive and fight, ammunition, food, fuel, medical supplies, had to come through that one creepy gas pipeline or across those risky river crossings near Kindrashivka. A single Ukrainian drone finding that pipeline exit could cut them off. A well-placed artillery strike on a river crossing would strand them. They had planted their flag in the northern ruins of the city, but Ukrainian forces still controlled the southern neighborhoods. They held the vital high ground south of the Oskil River. The Russians were not in charge of Kupyansk. They were just stuck in a district of it. They controlled a slice, not the whole pie. They had planted a flag, but they hadn't secured the city. They had created a vulnerable forward position dependent on a fragile supply line. They were exposed. Every box of bullets, every can of food, every battery for their radios had to travel a long, vulnerable journey to reach them. This is not how you secure a major city. This is how you get yourself trapped. And while they were busy making their victory videos and reporting their success up the chain of command, someone else was watching, planning, and moving. Ukraine's Kartia Corps, a powerful and experienced formation of the National Guard, was getting ready. They saw everything. They saw the Russian troops overstretched and vulnerable. They saw that thin, silly supply line running through a pipe. They knew the Russian claim was a house of cards, built on a few flags and camera angles. The Ukrainian commanders knew something very important. You don't always need to fight the soldier directly. Sometimes, it's smarter to cut the road behind him. They were about to prove that. The premature victory parade was over. The cold, brutal reality of a well-planned counterstrike was coming. The trap was set, and Russia had walked right into it, convinced they were the hunters when they were actually the prey. The stage was now set for a classic lesson in military strategy, taught not in a classroom, but in the frozen streets of Kupyansk. The trap is sprung. Ukraine's response to the Russian infiltration was not panic. It was not a desperate, messy fight in the city streets. It was the opposite. It was a cold, patient plan finally put into motion. While Russia was making victory videos, Ukraine was finishing a trap. The job was given to one of their toughest and most experienced groups, the soldiers of the Second Corps, Kahartia. These were not raw recruits. This was a formation of the National Guard, known for hard fighting. They had been watching. They had been waiting. They knew exactly where the Russian forces were thin. They knew about that gas pipeline. And in early December 2025, they got the order to strike. Their mission was not to kill every single Russian soldier in a big battle. Their mission was simpler and smarter. They aimed to cut the Russian advance off at the knees. The plan had 3 clear, brutal steps. Step 1, take back the villages. The villages of Kindrashivka and Radkivka, north of Kupyansk, were the door handles. Russia used them to get in. Ukraine needed to slam those doors shut. Step 2, race to the river. They had to push all the way to the banks of the Oskil River. This would cut every single road the Russians used for supplies. Step 3, destroy the pipeline. They had to find and wreck the hidden underground entrance to that gas pipe. That would seal the only secret path left. The attack began not with a shout, but with a hum. The air was filled with the sound of drones. First-person view drones, the kind pilots control with a video headset. These drones flew ahead of the soldiers, acting as their eyes. They spotted Russian positions in the villages. They saw machine gun nests. They saw where soldiers were sleeping. They relayed all of this back to the Ukrainian artillery. Then the artillery spoke. Precise shells started falling on the Russian outposts in Kindrashivka and Radkivka. The bombardment was not a random rain of fire. It was a careful scraping away of Russian defenses, guided by those drones watching from above. After the shells did their work, the infantry moved. Storm groups from units like the 13th Kartia Brigade began their advance. The fighting was close and fierce. Russian troops, surprised by the strength of the attack, fought back hard. They had not expected a major counterpunch. They thought they were the ones on the offensive. The battle for the villages was a bloody tug-of-war in the ruins. But Ukraine had the momentum. They also had a constant, deadly helper in the sky. Whenever a Russian team tried to set up a strong position, a drone would often find it first. A small FPV drone carrying a bomb would zip around a corner and explode before the Russians could react. One by one, key positions in the villages fell silent. Ukrainian soldiers cleared house after house. The Russian grip on the northern approach to Kupyansk was being pried loose, finger by finger. Meanwhile, a separate critical hunt was on. Special drone operators from a unit called Achilles were searching the woods and fields near Radkivka. They were not looking for soldiers. They were looking for a hole in the ground. They were looking for the entrance to the gas pipeline. Using footage from earlier reconnaissance and signals intelligence, they narrowed down the location. And then they found it. A camouflaged opening, big enough for a man to enter, hidden near a tree line. This was the secret mouth of the Russian supply snake. A drone carrying explosives dove straight into that dark hole. The explosion underground was muffled, but the effect was thunderous. The hidden road was now blocked with rubble. The ghost path was dead. The noose tightens. With the villages under attack and the pipeline sealed, the second phase of the Ukrainian plan kicked into high gear. This was the knockout blow. The goal was to complete the encirclement, to turn the Russian presence in northern Kupyansk from a foothold into a prison. Ukrainian units, energized by their success in the villages, pushed east. They drove like a spear towards the Oskil River. Russian forces, already reeling and now cut off from their main supply line through the pipe, could not hold a solid new line. Their communications were filled with confusion and urgent calls for help that could not be answered. The Ukrainian advance was relentless. It was not a slow, cautious crawl. It was a determined push, covered by a continuous umbrella of drone surveillance and artillery fire. They reached the western bank of the Oskil River, and then they kept going along it, clearing the area. They now physically controlled the ground that connected the trapped Russians in the city to the rest of the Russian army in the north. In a matter of days, the strategic picture had completely flipped. The several hundred Russian soldiers who had raised their flags in northern Kupyansk were now surrounded. Look at it on a map. Ukrainian forces held the southern part of Kupyansk itself. They now also held the villages to the west and north, and they controlled the river line to the east. The Russians were in a pocket, a small bubble of occupied territory with Ukrainian troops on all sides. Every single route for supplies was gone. The roads from the north, cut by Ukrainian troops. The river crossings, under Ukrainian watch. The secret pipeline, filled with debris. Nothing could get in, not a truck of ammunition, not a van of food, not a single reinforcement. The only thing that could reach them was radio waves, and those carried increasingly desperate messages. The Ukrainian military command made a simple announcement. They confirmed that the occupiers in Kupyansk had been cut off from their main supply routes. It was a dry, factual statement that described a catastrophe for the Russians. The proud vanguard, the soldiers who had appeared in all those propaganda videos, were no longer an attacking force. They were a besieged garrison. They were trapped in the shattered neighborhood they had supposedly conquered. Their food would run out. Their ammunition would run out. Their medicine would run out. All they could do was wait, defend a shrinking perimeter, and hope for a rescue mission that would be incredibly difficult and bloody for anyone to attempt. The Russian soldiers who had been sent on a mission of conquest now found themselves on a mission of bare survival. The triumph they had filmed just weeks earlier must have felt like a cruel joke. The Ukrainian Kartia Corps had not engaged them in a giant, dramatic battle for the city center. Instead, they had expertly cut the wires holding the Russian position up, and once those wires were cut, the whole thing came crashing down. The noose was closed, and it was only getting tighter. Desperation on Christmas Eve. A modern army cannot fight without supplies. A soldier needs bullets for his gun. He needs food to eat. He needs fuel for his vehicles and batteries for his radios. For the Russian troops trapped in northern Kupyansk, all of those things were now disappearing. They were not an army anymore. They were a group of stranded men, sitting in a frozen pocket of ruin, completely cut off. Their only hope was a thin, dangerous thread from the sky, an air bridge. This means trying to fly supplies in with helicopters or drones, but this is a terrible way to supply hundreds of soldiers. It is slow. It is risky. Ukrainian drones and anti-aircraft guns are always watching the sky. As the Ukrainian spokesperson Viktor Trehubov said plainly, trying to supply by air alone is not something that allows them to hold out for long. The words were a quiet death sentence for the pocket. Inside the encirclement, a harsh new reality took over. The initial confusion turned into grim understanding. They were not being rescued anytime soon. Morale, the will to fight, began to crumble. First it cracked. With no way forward and no way out, soldiers made a simple human choice: to survive. Trehubov reported that surrenders started happening. At first it was just a few scattered soldiers, alone or in pairs, waving white cloths. Then it became small groups. The most telling sign of total hopelessness was who surrendered. Among those giving themselves up were foreign mercenaries, fighters from other countries who came to fight for money. These are not young conscripts filled with patriotic feeling. They are professional soldiers who assess risk. When they decide to surrender, it means they have calculated that their situation is utterly futile. There is no chance and no paycheck is worth certain death. Even the voices that had been loudest in celebrating the capture of Kupyansk now fell silent or changed their tune. The pro-Russian military bloggers, who had posted the triumphant flag-raising videos, began to tell a different story. They wrote that the defense of northern Kupyansk had failed. They stated that a rescue operation was now no longer possible. Their message to the families of those trapped soldiers was clear: there is no hope. This atmosphere of desperation and panic explains what happened next. It explains the furious, violent, and ultimately pointless events of December 24, 2025. Far from the trapped pocket, the wider Russian military command faced a nightmare. They had hundreds of their soldiers, including some of their more experienced assault troops, surrounded and dying. They had promised the world this city was theirs. They could not just let them vanish. They had to try something, no matter the cost. So, on that Christmas Eve, they launched a series of frantic attacks. The Ukrainian General Staff reported 5 separate Russian assaults that day. The attacks hit near the villages of Petropavlivka, Pishchan, and Zarizhov. These places are key points on the map southwest of the Kupyansk pocket. They were not random. They were the gates to the prison, The Russian command was throwing bodies and metal at these gates, trying to bash them down to reach their trapped men. But these were not attacks of strength. They were attacks of pure desperation. They had no subtlety. They had no clever plan. They were brute force shoves against Ukrainian lines that were now strong, prepared, and waiting. The Ukrainian defenders, knowing exactly why the attacks were coming, held their ground. The fighting was fierce, but the result was never in doubt. All 5 attacks failed. Every single one was repelled. The critical bridge Russia had built wasn't made of steel and concrete. It was the network of supply routes, the roads through Kindrashivka, the crossings over the Oskil River, and that hidden pipeline. Ukraine had dismantled every piece of it, and now the soldiers who had crossed were stranded with no way back. The Russian forces gained nothing. They only lost more men and more equipment in the attempt. Viktor Trehubov summed it up perfectly. The Ukrainian counteroffensive had been a total surprise. Now the enemy simply lacked the resources to regain control. They were out of options. They were out of time. They were out of luck. By Christmas Day, the story of Kupyansk was completely rewritten. The propagandists who had declared a great victory in November were now quietly managing a massive public defeat. The critical bridge they had built, not of steel and concrete, but of supply lines and reinforcements, was more than damaged. It was gone, erased from the battlefield. The soldiers they had sent across that bridge were now prisoners, casualties, or men waiting for the end. The victory parade had lasted less than a month. It ended not with cheers, but with the silent fall of snow on a dead-end street and the distant sound of surrender. Ukraine's success came from simultaneous pressure on Russia's entire logistics network. Reconnaissance drones located targets, artillery destroyed them, infantry held recaptured territory, and each element reinforced the others. Russia couldn't adapt fast enough to multiple coordinated threats. The aftermath. By late December 2025, the isolated Russian pocket in northern Kupyansk collapsed completely. The strategy of encirclement and starvation achieved its final grim result. Ukrainian forces reported that surrenders, which began as a trickle, became a steady flow in the final week. Exhausted, hungry, and out of ammunition, Russian soldiers emerged from basements and trenches in small groups, following Ukrainian drone loudspeaker instructions to lay down their arms. Notably, among those surrendering were foreign mercenaries, whose participation signaled a profound hopelessness, as these professional fighters saw no path to victory or escape. Those who did not surrender faced 2 terrible choices: become casualties in futile last stands or attempt desperate solo escapes through minefields and Ukrainian patrols under cover of darkness, a gamble few won. Russia's high command, unable to accept the loss of a force they had publicly celebrated, mounted repeated and costly rescue attempts throughout late December. These were not subtle operations, but brutal, head-on assaults against the now solidified Ukrainian lines southwest of the pocket near villages like Petropavlivka and Sinkivka. They threw infantry, armor, and artillery into these attacks, trying to batter a corridor open. Each attempt failed utterly. Repelled by Ukraine's entrenched defenders who used the advantage of prepared positions and constant drone surveillance to break the assaults with heavy losses for the Russians. These failed relief efforts only compounded the disaster, wasting additional manpower and equipment in a futile effort to undo a strategic mistake. The triumphant propaganda videos from November, showing flags raised over liberated Kupyansk, now served as stark evidence of a catastrophic miscalculation. They stood as a digital tombstone for the operation, a reminder of the hubris that led hundreds of soldiers into a trap. On the ground, the outcome was undeniable. Ukrainian forces of the Kartia Corps solidified their control over the northern villages and approaches, systematically clearing the area. Russia's grand plan to turn Kupyansk into a forward logistics hub for the entire Lyman-Siversk front lay in ruins. The infrastructure was damaged, the routes were controlled by Ukraine, and the attempt had cost them a significant number of experienced assault troops and irreplaceable equipment. The defeat was not just tactical but deeply psychological, proving that even a captured position is worthless if you cannot hold it, and that Ukraine retained the sharp ability to punish overextension with devastating effect. The lesson. The battle for Kupyansk in December 2025 teaches a clear lesson for modern war. It shows that victory does not always go to the bigger army or the one with more tanks. It goes to the side that fights smarter, Ukraine won here not by matching Russia's strength, but by using a superior plan. Their strategy was a perfect four-step trap. First, they let the enemy in. They allowed Russian forces to infiltrate the northern part of the city. This looked like a Russian success, but it was actually a trick. It made the Russian soldiers stretch their supply lines further and further. They became like a rubber band pulled too tight, ready to snap. Second, Ukraine aimed at the enemy's stomach, not its fists. Instead of charging straight into a bloody street fight, they focused on logistics. They used drones and artillery to find and cut every supply route. The roads, the river, the secret pipeline. They understood a simple truth. A soldier without bullets and food is not a fighter. He is a prisoner waiting to happen. Third, they struck with perfect precision at the right moment. When the Russians were most overstretched and vulnerable, the Khartia Corps hit back. Their counterattack was not everywhere at once. It was a focused, powerful punch on a very specific spot. The villages and supply lines to the north. They used drones as their eyes and guides, making every move count. It was a small, sharp knife cut, not a wild swing of a club. Finally, they let the trap finish the job. Once the Russian troops were surrounded and cut off, Ukraine did not need to waste lives in a big final assault. They just held the ring tight. They waited. Without supplies, the trapped force began to crumble from within. Morale collapsed. Soldiers surrendered. The enemy defeated themselves. Ukraine's best allies in the final stage were hunger, cold, and hopelessness. This is the new blueprint. Big, slow armies are vulnerable. Speed, information, and precision are king. A small group of determined soldiers armed with drones, good intelligence, and a clever plan can defeat a larger force. They can isolate it, strangle it, and watch it fall apart. Kupyansk proved that Ukraine still has the skill to plan and execute such brilliant operations. For Russia, it was a warning that capturing a place on a map means nothing if you cannot hold it. In today's war, the most powerful weapon is often not a bomb, but the perfect plan.